Thank everybody for attending here at Adorama, and then I guess for being broadcast out into the ether in the internet. So I like to say hello to everyone out there. My name is David Lykes Keenan, and I have been a photographer really seriously for about 10 years. Prior to that, I programmed computers for many, many years. Predating that, and I'll show you a little bit of my history when we get into this. Predating that, in high school and college, I thought I wanted to be a photographer when I grew up, but as many of us of my generation, my father had other ideas for me, and so I became an engineer. What I'd like to do today a little bit is to introduce you to Fair Witness, which is a book of street photography that was just published, released last March. It was printed by Damiani, who is an Italian publisher. And I did a Kickstarter campaign for this about a year ago at this time, and it eventually came to pass. Fortunately, I've had the support of many significant figures in the world of photography with my work. As you see in the bottom of this, Elliot Irwit became a friend of mine through an association that I had with an organization called the Austin Center for Photography. And he and many other people were very instrumental in helping me get this book put together, which was quite an honor, I tell you. My book, after it came out, very briefly was a #1 bestseller on Amazon for black and white photography. Now, I didn't get too excited about this because these #1 new releases things, I think they change as quickly as the wind, and it may have been there for 3 hours and then gone again. But of course, I don't tell anybody that, and so I still happily show them that it was a #1 seller on Amazon for at least for an hour, which made me feel pretty good. And I also noticed the other day that the book is sold out at the publisher. They do sales every so often, and they have no books in their warehouse. Now, I am taking that as a good sign that the book is selling like gangbusters, but honestly, I don't know. I think that maybe means they're just all out of distribution and they haven't been sent back yet because the book is so new. But still, I take this as a good sign that my book is receiving some popular support. So what I want to do in this presentation briefly is just to tell you a little bit about where I started, how I ended up being a photographer, and what types of things I did as a very early photographer, and then how it led to where I am today. As a kid, I took typical pictures of the family, took pictures of kids in the neighborhood, went down to the ballpark. This was Tiger Stadium in Detroit, and took pictures of my heroes, Al Kaline. For those, not many of you are old enough to remember who Al Kaline was, but he was maybe the greatest right fielder, at least in Tiger history. And I did my share of art photography, although at the time, as a high schooler and an early college student, I really had no idea what fine art photography was. I mean, really all I knew was sports photography. That's what I thought I wanted to be. I had no inkling of who the greats were at the time. This would have been the early 1970s. The peak of Gary Winogrand and Friedlander and a lot of the greats of street photography, and quite honestly, I didn't know who any of these people were. And like a lot of geeks in high school, I photographed for the yearbook. This was the yearbook from my high school, and just quickly a few of my maybe finer pictures of the 70s for the school yearbook. And I hope you can see these. I realize my images are coming out a lot smaller than I thought. I didn't have the specs to prepare this so it would have displayed larger, so my apologies for that. I went to college at Michigan State and in East Lansing, Michigan, and this is me in one of my common reposes in college. And I carried forth my interest in photography, although by this time I already knew that I probably was not going to carry on and be a photographer in my early 20s. As I graduated, my dad said, "You're going to be an engineer." So I pretty much was going to be an engineer. But I did do some photography. This is Gordon Lightfoot doing a concert in Genesee Fieldhouse at Michigan State. This is my first love at the time. I really, really wanted to be a sports photographer. I envisioned photographing sports, the Detroit Tigers and the Lions and the Pistons, being a Detroiter, working for the Detroit News at the Detroit Free Press. And so I did a lot of sports photography. This was a picture of in college. And I loved photographing basketball. And believe it or not, in those days, there were no limitations as to who could sit under the basket. So I had no press credentials, but I went down and sat right under the goal and took pictures of Big Ten basketball. And I thought that was pretty cool. I also photographed tennis. Anybody know who this is? This is Bjorn Borg. Yeah, this is probably, I think he was still a teenager at this point. And he played an exhibition match against Rod Laver, who was kind of one of the granddaddies at the time. This again would have been in the early 70s, I think. And then this is, I show this because this is really the first foray that I made into fine art photography, although I had no idea what the heck fine art photography was. And I actually did a series, which nowadays, as I've learned more and more about photography, if you go show your work to people, they want to see a body of work, which is an examination of one or more subjects, or usually one subject, and where you just pick something and you examine it and present it as a complete story. And I did something like this when I was a teenager, and without really having any idea what it was going to become, or that it might actually be what we call today a body of work. And these are all pretty much photographs by a teenager with a Nichromat camera back in the 70s. I'm not pretending that these are particularly great pictures. I just wanted to show you kind of where I began. Although I look back on them now, and I actually think they're not bad. This was a presentation I did in my home of the whole series. And I think they hold together pretty well. And I'm actually kind of proud of this. It was really the first time, without any knowledge, any formal education about photography, I did a photo series. And I'm proud to have it on my wall now, actually, all these years later. Okay. Once I left college, I did go off and program computers for 30 some odd years. I became the engineer that my father wanted me to be. Around the turn of this century, I began to get pretty well burned out with that. I went down and bought a camera on a lark when a friend went and bought a camera, and all of a sudden my interest in photography started coming back. And so I want to show you a little bit about where that early interest, which is around the year 2003, 2004, where that took me. And then we'll get to really what this is. And if there's any questions along the way, please feel free to stop me and ask. I'm happy to share with you whatever I can. This was the first photograph that I ever had published in a magazine. This is a photograph I called Bike Boy. It was taken in the Czech Republic. I submitted it to Shutterbug magazine and they liked it. And it was the first time I ever had a photograph appear in any sort of publication. And an early series I did back in November of 2004 was to go out into various parts of Austin, where I've lived most of my life in Austin, Texas, and I did what I called a frame a day project. I took a 35mm camera with one roll of film. I went out and exposed one frame each day for that month. And then I prepared a show of all 30 of those photographs and actually made a book out of it. And I'm not going to show you all 30, but I'm going to show you what I think were representative of what I took. Of course, when you do something like that, some of them are going to be pretty lousy, but actually I ended up thinking I got a few pretty good pictures. Recognize who that is? Yeah. Out of my cold, dead hands. Yeah. Yes.
Did you have any other limitations besides the one frame a day? Could it anywhere, anything?
It could be anywhere, anything. I tried to organize it by week into some sort of theme, but it was a very loose theme, and I only did that to try to make it a little bit easier on myself. Yeah.
Also, just going back to earlier, a couple of questions about fair business. You said, I think it was the year before you had done a campaign.
A Kickstarter campaign?
Oh, Kickstarter campaign. And then what was like the venue? Where?
Well, I will get to that. Yeah, I'm taking you through my exciting early days, and then, but most of what I'm going to talk about will be about this book, and there is a slide devoted to the Kickstarter campaign, and I'll tell you more about it when I get there.
I was also curious to know what the print run was.
The print one was 1,000. Yep. Any other questions? Okay. Again, these are still a few more samples of the frame a day project. I also went to on one of my European trips, went to Croatia and had a friend introduce me to a city called Luca Bar. And Luca Bar was at the front lines of the war between the Croats and the Serbs in the early 90s. And this is really my first attempt at any sort of documentary series, where I went in to this war-torn city. Half of it was still in a state of destruction, and I went specifically to find beauty in the city that had been destroyed. And so I wandered around there for 2 days, and I had clouds like this for both days, which was just amazing. And so I took pictures. I wish that was bigger. I'm sorry. Pictures of destruction of what the city looked like after after war had been there. This was a window of a department store, which is no longer there. And a bit of a departure for me was something that I called sweet spots, where I took a Diana camera. Normally I'm a black and white photographer, but I took a Diana camera with color film and wandered around for a couple of summers just looking for things in a different way than I normally do with a 35mm camera. If you've never used a Diana or a Holga or a toy camera like that, it is really a very liberating experience, because you really stop thinking about a lot of the details of how you take pictures, and you just click the shutter and hope you get something decent to look at.
What film did you use the Diana camera?
I use primarily Portra, Kodak Portra 160, and I bought expired film. I didn't see any reason to use fresh film in there. The pictures are going to be crappy anyway.
Right.
So I went out to eBay and bought expired film.
Right. Thank you.
Sure. I've often wondered what this restaurant would have been like in Giddings, Texas. You can get your fresh donuts and your seafood there. Okay, now we're getting a little bit closer to home. This is a screen grab off of my website, and this is the home page of my website. And since January of 2007, I have been doing something called a picture a week, or a PAW, and where I post a photograph of mine on the home page of my website every weekend, and I've not missed a week in over 8 years. And this particular process, I think, has taught me more about photography than anything I have done to date. It forces me to edit my work, to look at my work, to make a decision as to what photograph I want to share with the world. And my goal is each week's photograph is going to be better than the previous week's photograph. Of course, that's not always possible, but that's what I try to accomplish every time. And so this is a sample of the home page. If anyone's interested in getting my picture of the week, which is something that will appear in your email once a week, you can go to my homepage, dlkphotography.com, and click to join the email list, and you will be on the list where I will be mailing out an email that looks, where's my cursor? Come on. Okay, it looks like this. Again, I'm sorry it's kind of small to see, but the email basically is like this. And this is this last week's picture of the week. It is actually my tribute to the tragedy that happened in Charleston, South Carolina. This is a photograph taken out in front of the Emmanuel AME Church where those people were killed week before last. It was a very somber moment, really, to have walked onto that in front of that church. But anyway, this is just a sample of what my picture of the week emails will look like if you choose to sign up for them. And the last thing I want to talk about before I get into the book specifically is I also have a Facebook group. The Facebook group is called Photography That Doesn't Suck. And this is my attempt to play internet photography curator. This is not about promoting my work. I post every day of the week, and I'm up to 837. I will post some photograph that crosses my screen that I think is worthy of sharing with the world. And I personally think there's so much internet photography that you see on the internet that really is not worth your time. And you may think that what I post is not worth your time either, but at least this is my attempt to display things to the world that I think is worth people's time. So you're welcome to join that group if you like. Once again, it's called Photography That Doesn't Suck. And hopefully you will agree with me that it doesn't suck. Okay, now this brings me really up to very close to where we are today. I've founded an organization in Austin called ACP, the Austin Center for Photography, about 7 years ago. It was modeled after ICP here in New York. Unfortunately, ACP died 3 years after I left it, and I wonder why that might have happened. But ACP was a really wonderful experience for me in that I was able to meet a lot of well-known photographers. And I mentioned earlier that I had met Elliot Erwitt, and I met Elliot Erwitt really because of the Austin Center for Photography. And Elliot and I actually became friends. I was his handler when he came to Austin to speak. And this is a photograph that I took of Elliot as we were out wandering around one day. And he is so much like his photography. I mean, he is just, he's 83 years old, 84 years old, and he just doesn't take himself seriously. He was really, really fun to be around. And I want to show you a few of his pictures, which are going to be even smaller than mine. But Elliot is my hero. And this is probably my favorite picture of his. If you've not looked at any of Elliot's work, looked at his books, please go to Strand or go someplace and just pick up some of his books. And his books are as funny as any photography book you'll ever look at. He's got an eye that is just absolutely amazing. And speaking of heroes, through the process of ACP and my involvement with photography in Austin, I also met Eli Reed. Eli Reed is also a member of Magnum Photos. He teaches photojournalism at the University of Texas, and he took an interest in my photography, really without me being aware of it. And at one point in time, he told me, "Dave, it's time for you to do a book." And I wasn't even really aware that he was paying attention to what I was doing, but apparently he was, and this book is the product of that comment that came from Eli Reed, who's become a friend and a mentor. Eli is responsible for several books. Early in his career, he did a book on Beirut, and he also did a book entitled Black in America. But recently, they just released a retrospective. UT Press in Austin released a retrospective of Eli's work called A Long Walk Home. And it wasn't, I mean, I knew Eli was a significant figure in photography, but it wasn't until I saw the photographs in this book that I really knew why. The book, the photos in Eli's retrospective are mind-boggling. And again, if you're a fan of street photography, of photojournalism, I encourage you to check out Eli's book. If not, buy yourself a copy. Okay, so as part of the process, back to what I did, as part of the process to publish Fair Witness last July, I conducted a Kickstarter campaign, and it was a successful campaign, and I raised a little over $26,000 to have this book printed. I had an agreement with Damiani, an Italian publisher, for a fixed amount, and the print run was going to be 1,000 books. They kept 500 to put through their distribution channels, and I kept 500. And through the Kickstarter campaign, I pre-sold almost 300 copies of my book, which I think is pretty good. The last thing you want to do if you're going to do a book, whether it's self-published or through a publisher, is end up with a garage full of books that you don't know what you're going to do with them. I'm down to about 120 copies of the book, which, I think that turned out pretty well. Kickstarter campaigns, if you've never done one, they are a full-time job. They require a lot of work, a lot of homework. Some people have suggested that I put together some kind of talk about how to do a Kickstarter campaign. I may do that someday, but it's not something you want to do every week or every month or every year, because you really kind of wear out your friends. I think I wore out my friends and my friends in social media. So this was as you can see by the book in front of you, this is the cover of the book that we ended up producing. I would carry around a box of work prints and show them to a lot of different people. Eli and I spent many hours going through the prints, the boxes of work prints. I took the same box to show it to Elliot, to Mary Ellen Mark, to Maggie Stieber, to a number of people who guided me in helping me choose which photographs belong in the book and which ones don't. When Eli saw this one through the box of prints, he said, "Dave, here's your cover." And I didn't doubt him, so that became the cover of the book. And so what I'm going to do now is, rather than just show you the photographs, I wanted to kind of make it a little bit of an exercise. I'm going to show you most of the photographs in the book, not all of them, and I'm going to pause every now and then and kind of answer this question, and you can decide whether you have something else you want to add to that answer. But I like to have you become a little bit more involved in what we're doing here. And I learned a number of years ago in seeing a presentation by another Magnum photographer. He was president of Magnum at the time, Richard Calvar. He gave a presentation of his work that I saw in Germany. And he just started a slideshow of his work and went over and sat down. He did not talk over his photographs. He was very strongly of the opinion that you let your photographs do the talking. And I have adopted that. I believe that's the case. If the photograph doesn't work, anything I say about it isn't going to help it any. So I'm just going to show you the photographs. I'm not going to comment on them. If you see something and you want to go back to it and ask a question, certainly I'm happy to do that. But one time, Richard looked at my website, and he didn't say anything to me about, "Dave, your photographs are good, your photographs are bad." He said, "Just get rid of the cutesy titles." And so the titles of photographs are now "Man on a Bus." They're no longer, funny man wearing bozo hat amuses the crowd on bus. That's just too much information. Let what's in the photograph communicate with the people viewing your photograph, and don't mix it up with a bunch of words. If you look at my book, there's just pictures. There are no words. And again, that's the same idea. I want the pictures to do the talking. Okay, so here we go. What makes a photograph? And hopefully through the sharing of my photographs, I'll help answer that question. These are in the order that they're in the book, although they're not all the pictures. There's 70 pictures in the book total, and I've taken a few out for the sake of brevity in this presentation. So the first response or first answer that I give to what makes a photograph is obviously the content of the photograph. What is the photograph of? I like to think a photograph is, well, you'll see. I'll flesh it out as we go. If I'm going too fast or too slow for somebody, let me know. I will break my rule. How many of you have seen this lion around in Manhattan? Yeah. It really gets around. What makes a photograph? Content, and then the composition of that content.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I'm new to photography. I'm just wondering, how often do you ask the people you're photographing if you can take their photo? And is that something you just don't do? I see great photos all the time and thinking, if I shoot this photo, this person might get upset with me.
Well, that's a question that is asked of almost every street photographer who has ever talked about their work. I don't ask anybody.
Okay.
There were a couple of pictures in here that were setups in a sense, like this one. This is a friend of mine who said, hang on a second, and disappeared around the corner. And next thing I knew, he was upstairs at this gallery mugging with this statue. And so I started taking pictures. I mean, it was like exactly what he wanted me to do. And then the one photograph earlier with the kid with the hula hoop, that one's a setup. I mean, I'd seen him hula hooping, texting, and I went over and asked him if he would recreate that for me. But generally, I don't ask people if I can photograph them. And you don't, and you don't have to. Some people are uncomfortable doing it, but you do not have to have their permission. As long as they're in public, as long as they're in a public place, and as long as there's no presumption of privacy on their part, they are fair game to be photographed, and they had nothing to say about it. That's not true everywhere. I mean, it's in some countries like Quebec's not a country, but they like to think that they are. But also in France, they do have laws to protect people on the street. So I went to Quebec and I was photographing and I had homeless people. I'm gonna call the cops on you for taking my picture. And I said, yeah, go ahead. But it turns out if they had, I was breaking the law without knowing it by photographing these people. And there's this thing in New York where this guy was photographing people in their out of their window into their window and another building across the way, and the guy, he got away with it, and even I think that's kind of pushing it a little bit. But anyway, do you have a question?
Yeah, so then I assume that for anything that is set up, you don't have releases.
I do not have any releases. Right.
Even printed it? Even printed, if they recognize themselves, if they have a quarrel about it? What do you do?
I mean, in this country, anybody can sue anybody at any time for any reason. So if someone saw their picture in the book and wanted to make a big deal about it, I mean, they certainly are entitled to do so. But if something is published in a book and it's considered editorial, like in a newspaper, or if it's considered art, then they're fair game. But somebody could sue me if they wanted to. And I would have to, just because that's the way our legal system works. But the law ultimately would be down on my side, but would I want to spend the thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars that might be necessary to defend myself? That's really, it comes down to this, who's got the deeper pockets.
This image is an example. That's someone else's artwork that's there.
Yep.
How did you handle that situation?
Again, it's in public view. I wasn't concerned about it. It's that's taken from the street, from the sidewalk. So it's in public view. There's no presumption of privacy. I think the same thing would apply to that having been a person.
Did your publisher give you any trouble or any questions?
Never once asked me for anything in the way of releases, because they publish street photography, and that's.
Did you have to sign any waiver to take full responsibility, or anything like that? If anyone does come back and...
Perhaps. I mean, I don't remember all the details of the contract. I mean, I'm sure they have stuff in their contract which they're a company, and I'm just a little artist. They're going to cover their tail if they have to. Any other questions? Should we keep going? Okay. Okay, these are some more pictures from the book. Oops. Well, you saw that first one already. I think a photograph, especially a black and white photograph, will have texture. That texture will be in the form of grain, or it will be in the form of some compositional element in the photograph. It'll have some kind of feeling, almost a tactile feeling.
Sorry, I do have another question. If you're
Yeah.
not going up to these people, like how long is your lens?
I almost always use a 50 millimeter lens. I mean, never anything longer than a 50.
Yeah.
So I'm often fairly close.
I got a book down there. Is it a digital camera with the screen that can pop? Are you being kind of hidden when you do it, or your eye level?
No, most of my pictures are taken with a Leica, so they're almost always like this.
And digital like that.
In the book, it's about 50-50. It's about 50% film images and about 50% digital images. I try to make everything look like it was a film image, though. So.
When you do go out and do street photography, what camera would you prefer using versus like what type of film style, etc. and so on?
Well, I'm definitely a Leica photographer. I like to use an M camera. And as far as if I use a film camera, I will almost always use Tri-X. I mean, it's been so long, and I can hardly tell. I don't remember which of these are film and which are digital anymore. But interestingly, I had somebody select to do a show form of this work, and I think it was in Portland, and I was astonished. He picked almost all film images, and he had no way of knowing. But it was just like, how did this guy know? So apparently, his eye, he's able to tell, at least at some subconscious level. Again, a photograph should have depth. You want to have something in the foreground, something in the midground, something in the background. That gives it anything. You want to make it appear to be as less two-dimensional as you possibly can. Apart from not talking about my pictures for this one, I told you earlier that I passed around boxes of work prints for people to look at, not just photographers, but friends, and I would have them go through the box and mark on the back, is this an A picture, a B picture, or a C picture to your estimation, just to kind of get a feel for which pictures worked for people and which pictures didn't work for people. This one didn't rate very highly with all the people that looked at it, but there was one person that liked it a lot, and I've mentioned his name a couple times already, but Elliot Irwitt really liked this picture. So I said, well, it's going to be in the book just as my silent homage to him. So Elliot, this is for you. And I kind of like it too. I think a photograph should have something of a story in it. And I like to think that what makes my street photography successful, if you consider it successful, is that each photograph does suggest some kind of little story. It's not a picture of just three people walking down the street, holding hands or holding an ice cream cone or something. There's actually I like to think anyway, something going on. So that you could look at it and say, what is going on in this photograph? And maybe make up a little story for yourself that makes it worth looking at and just really more interesting to look at. This is my, not having ever met him, but this is my homage to Robert Frank, if you've ever seen The Americans. And I'll tell you all a secret. This book looks just like The Americans, and it's not an accident. I even laid out the pictures the way he did. One picture on a page. So I figure, if somebody can make the most famous book ever and I can copy them, then why not, right? So I did. This is the last picture in the book, and so I throw a little one of my, kind of an odd one of myself in there. So again, what makes a photograph? I've listed content, composition, texture, depth, story, and mystery. And hopefully the little stories present a mystery that you may need to solve or may want to solve. And do I have time to go to one more? Okay, I want to go briefly through a newer series of mine. It's a series that I call Look at Me. I really haven't done anything with it to speak of yet. In fact, it's kind of a work in progress. I did make a couple little handmade books like this. Wire bound with little tiny prints about yay big inside. I did have a show of 32 of these much larger prints at a gallery in Washington, D.C., which was really pretty amazing to see a big grid of these portraits on the wall. But what I do is I approach young men at random, and I give them that little card you saw at the very beginning. And I say, I would like to photograph you. And I photograph them all in the same style, all like this. I never hold my camera vertically anymore. I always hold it horizontally. So I had to figure out how to do portraiture in a landscape format. And so this is what I came up with. I've probably approached 1,400 young men so far with this, and about 135 have agreed to be photographed. I love the street photography. I mean, it's been a big part of my life, but this is really more personal work for me. This is kind of digs deeper into my past and to my youth and certain aspects of my youth that weren't the way I wanted it to be. So So I throw it in now that a photograph should have passion in it, whether it be your passion, well, it should have your passion in it as the photographer. It should represent something that is passionate to you. And it will, and if you've done a good job with all these attributes, the passion will show through. People see the Look at Me portraits and they say they see me, which is kind of cool. And believe me, I'm not in any one of these pictures. I've made some really good friends out of this project, by the way. It's really been a great experience. Have fun. Yes, that's who. Yes, you did recognize him.
Yeah, because I took a photo of him too, and I was like,
Yeah. Anybody else know who this is? You see Boyhood? Yeah. Eller's been a friend of mine since he was 15. So anyway, what makes a photograph? For all of us as photographers, it should be fun. We should go out and enjoy what we're doing and provide enjoyment for others as well. I mean, these young men that I photograph, I mean, almost universally, they tell me how much fun they had during the 2 or 3 hours we spent together, working together, collaborating on making a photograph. So this is the little book that I made with the Frame a Day project, the November project, where I took those 1 pictures per day. This is one of the little books that I made from Look at Me. Obviously, that's Fair Witness. I didn't talk about piss, so whole another thing. And I didn't talk about In the Gutter, which is another little book that I did. So all of these self-published except for Fair Witness. And this is the last slide. I have copies of the book here that you can purchase if you'd like them. It's also available on Amazon, and they're maybe thinking about bringing them into the store here. I'm not sure whether that'll happen or not. If you decide to go to my website, buy it there. I'll send you a signed copy as well. So, but that's the end of my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Questions?
what software do you use to analyze your
I use Camera Raw and Photoshop. I was around when Lightroom first came out, and I know it's a heck of a lot better now than it was when it first came out, but when it first came out, it was such a dog. It was so slow. I never got on the bandwagon. And I created my own archiving system, a way of filing my images and my negatives and my scans. And so I just used that. So I never use Lightroom. There are a few plugins that I use. A secret one, if you use black and white, you want to find, it's called ALCE by this guy in Italy. This is one of the deepest, darkest secrets, and you're really going to be glad I told you this. ALCE stands for a local area contrast enhancer. I mean, it's kind of what the clarity thing does in Lightroom and Camera Raw, but it really does, it makes an image pop in such a beautiful way, and there are many different ways that you can adjust it. It's relatively inexpensive, I think, so ALCE is a nice Photoshop plugin to use.
When you're displaying the galleries, do you find yourself printing traditionally your film work and doing printer digital work, or you just go?
I scan all my film work. I do all my own printing. Excuse me, but it's all digital printing.
It's all digital.
Yeah. A number of years ago, when I was getting back into photography, I said I was a programmer. So I sat at a desk with computers all day long. I said, man, it sure would be great if I didn't have to sit in front of computers. And I built a darkroom, and I forgot what drudgery a darkroom is.
When you resize, are you using particular software?
Perfect Resize. It used to be called Genuine Fractals,
Right.
but there are many. I don't know if that one's any better than other ones, but But it seems to work pretty well. Any other questions?
All right, everyone, give it up for David Lykes Keenan.